Hi, and welcome to another of our monthly episodes of Beebe Book Buzz, where librarians from Beebe Library in Wakefield talk to you about what we've been reading and give you some suggestions for things you might like to try. I'm Jeff Clapes from the Reference Department at the library, and I'm joined today by Karen Stern, also in Reference and our fiction librarian, and Jackie Powers, who is our Assistant Director. So I guess we'll jump right in.
Okay,
and
let's do it.
Why don't, Karen, why don't you start?
I will start. I wanted to tell you today about a book called The Elegance of the Hedgehog by Muriel Barbary, which was a huge, it's actually not an old book, but it came out here in 2008 after being a huge bestseller in Europe, especially in France where it was written. And it's a story told by a middle-aged woman named Renee and a 12-year-old girl named Paloma. And Renee is the sort of grouchy concierge of a big apartment building in France, full of sort of upper middle class families, and Paloma is the daughter of one of those families who lives upstairs. And both of these two characters are hiding things from the people around them. They live these secret lives. Both are highly intelligent. Renee she's an autodidact. She teaches herself philosophy. She knows all kinds of things that your typical concierge is not supposed to know, and she's keeping that from the world because she doesn't feel, for various reasons. And Paloma is just, like most 12-year-old girls, she detests her family and everything, all the bourgeois things that they represent. And she is planning on not only setting her house on fire on her 13th birthday, but she plans to kill herself as well. And they're both searching for something. There's a lot of philosophy in this book because Muriel Barbary is actually a professor of philosophy, or was anyway. And there's a lot of searching for beauty. There's a lot of talk about looking at how society works and doesn't work, and the rigid class structure in French society and all that kind of stuff. And these two characters both have a lot to say about all of these things until someone moves into the apartment and changes everything for both of them and manages to see them for who they truly are, which is what they really are both looking for. So anyway, that's Renee and Paloma, and I think this is a book for people who love character and a good sort of, there's a good bittersweet story of friendship and love. It's also a book for people who like to think, because there is quite a bit of sort of philosophy thrown in. Some people have found the philosophy a bit too much. The first half of it has quite a bit of it, and then the second half is given over to the whole story as it develops between the three characters and their kind of meeting of the minds and hearts. But yeah, so the criticism of it has been that it's a little pretentious, a little showy on the philosophy side. But some people liked it. Did you?
I read it when it first came out, so long ago, and I don't remember the plot at all, but I know I loved it, but I think for me it was the language. I think she's a really beautiful writer.
She's a beautiful writer, absolutely.
And I remember kind of feeling like the sense of place.
Yeah, that was kind of, I had the same experience. I read it a while ago, and I don't remember the details, but I just remember.
So much, Paris isn't so much the character, but the apartment building and sort of the life of these people.
Well, and also the sort of the concierge thing isn't, Paris isn't so much a character, but that relationship of living in a building with different people and having a concierge is a kind of
French.
Is a very French thing.
Oh, it's so French. I mean, it's meant to be so French.
The relationships kind of revolve around that. That's a little different from what most of us here would have ever experienced.
And she writes it in order to pillory the French system. She's very much, all the good characters in this are connected to the outside, things outside French.
Now it was written originally in French, right? And
it was written in French. This is a translation, but it's a beautiful translation.
I remember liking the translation and thinking that it didn't feel like a translation.
Oh, no, not at all. And I listened to it the second time. This is the second time I read it, and I listened to it, and the audio is great. The woman who does Renee, the concierge, she's perfect. She has just that sort of gravelly, cigarette-filled voice, and she also, I think, knows French, so her pronunciation of things is good.
correct, yeah.
So it's worth a listen, I think, as
Yeah.
well.
Now you're doing it for your book club this spring too, right?
We did just do.
Oh, you
for
already
the
did it,
book
yeah.
club. It was an amazing discussion. There were 23 people there, and some people hated it, and most people really liked it. But like I said, the philosophy for some people is a little bit too much.
Especially because it's in the beginning, so you sort of have to wade through it.
A lot of people felt it was better on a second reading, actually,
Hmm.
because you kind of knew the end of the story, you knew what you were heading towards, and you could sink into the philosophy a little bit more in the beginning.
I actually own it and keep meaning to reread it.
Yeah, no, it's worth a reread, but again, or a re-listen.
Or listen.
Yeah, either one. So that's The Elegance of the Hedgehog by
Great.
Barbary.
Jackie.
I'm still in my nonfiction phase. I have not read any fiction really on my maternity leave I don't know, because I think nonfiction is easier to kind of come and go to in a lot of ways. You're not
following
necessarily
the plot quite the same
following
way,
an
yeah.
arc. But what I read a couple weeks ago and loved was John Hodgman's Vacation Land. He's the guy, I feel like most people probably know him from the Mac and PC commercials.
Oh, yeah, he's the older-
He was the old guy with the beard.
with
He's
the- yeah.
or I don't know if he had a mustache then, but he's the PC. He might have been clean shaven. Part of the joke of this is that now he has this really bad facial hair, and he laughs about it. It's like a messy, messy beard. But he was also on The Daily Show with Jon Stewart. He was a contributor for a long time. He's written other stuff. He's from this area. He's from Brookline, and the book is about. It's about his life, but it's sort of centered around his vacation homes, which the funniest part about it is really that he acknowledges that he is this privileged white man and gets it. He gets that everything he's talking about is ridiculous and first world problems, and he owns that, and it really makes the book so funny. His family, I guess, he was an only child, and they lived in this sprawling Brookline house, and he had basically at one point his own apartment, and when he was 14.
Wow.
And so he talks about that and how his parents then, he was kind of the cherished, coddled only child, and his parents were intellectuals. I don't want to say, I don't know if they were professors or something like that, but they also had a house in Western Mass, which is I liked because that's where I'm from. But it was more rural parts of, I think it was in the Berkshires, and it's this little dilapidated shack. And when his mother died, which was I think when he was in his early to mid 20s, it was kind of left to him, and this is sort of this thing that she loved, and so it's this. He ties in a lot of, how his time with his mother and when she was dying, and she passed away I think fairly abruptly. She was sick, but it was kind of 6 months, and she was gone. And so there's this, how he can't bring himself to quite, get rid of this house, but they don't really spend any time there. I think he and his wife now live in New York. And they also have, so then that's the first part, and then the second part is their house, they have a house in Maine, and how his wife loved Maine, and he had to kind of be coerced into Maine, and how he thinks the ocean's trying to kill him, and all the everything's rocky and cold, and the people don't want you there, and but it's very.
And the water's 40 degrees.
Yes, his humor is very dry. He's very witty. He's very self-deprecating.
It sounds very New England.
It's very New England. He's really just super dry. I'm trying to think of what it's who it's like. It's hints of David Sedaris. It's not. He's not the same, but he's got that same kind of I know that, I am a 45-year-old man who should not be walking around with no shirt on type thing. But he makes jokes like that constantly.
Bill Bryson? Anything like Bill Bryson?
Kind of, but Bill Bryson is a
older.
little older. He's more erudite in the way in that way, somewhere between Bryson and Sedaris.
Right.
But he's so funny, and I was laughing out loud at a lot of the parts. It's ridiculous, and it's the premise is completely, again, privileged white man. He's
That sounds like a good summer read.
It would be
when you're on vacation
Is it
yourself.
long, or is it?
No, a couple hundred pages.
Oh, okay.
And it was pretty popular. It was on our buzz table for a little while.
Yep.
But he's, I think, a specific audience. I think you kind of
one that would suit people around here. It sounds
yes,
like.
I think yes, very New England.
Yeah.
But yes, so that was Vacation Land, John Hodgman. Definitely recommend it.
I have a whole pile of things to talk about. I'm not going to talk about all of them, but I did want to mention a couple of things that I I referred to in last month's talk because I just wanted to tease people about it because they were coming out, and I was really excited about them because they're the things I've been waiting for to read all spring. And now I finished them, and I don't know what to read
You're
next.
sad.
Yeah, I'm sad. I'll have to read the things you recommend. But I know, Karen, you were waiting for this
I
too.
can't wait
and
to
now
read
that I'm
that.
finished with it, I can give it to you. Circe is, the only thing that I would say is bad about this book is that the author needs to keep writing more.
Right.
This is only her second novel. It's Madeline Miller, and her first novel, which came out it was a few years ago now.
4 or
It's
5,
been
right?
4 or
at
5
least
years
5
ago.
years. Was called The Song of Achilles. And what she does, I'm a big fan of Greek myths, myths in general, but particularly Greek myths. And what she does is she retells the old stories, but in a way that makes them so alive. And her writing, she's definitely a very literary writer, but not in an off-putting way for
No,
people who find
it's
that
totally accessible.
it's
It's
very
beautiful.
accessible. And I just find it amazing. Both of the books, they're similar in some ways, but this one definitely was different, and I'll kind of talk about why I think that's the case. The thing that I find amazing is how she can take stories that to a large degree were never really fleshed out. Part of the whole thing with myths is that nobody wrote out something in incredible detail. The story of Circe is from the Odyssey,
Right.
where just like the 60-second summary is that after the Trojan War, Odysseus, when he was returning back to Penelope, his wife, on the Isle of Ithaca, he gets diverted by the gods, and so after being away for 10 years in the war, it takes him like another 10 years to get back home because he has all the adventures and tragedies trying to get his men and their ships back to Ithaca. And one of the places he stops along the way is he spends about a year or so on Circe's island, and she's a sorceress in Greek mythology. But what I love about what she's done is she takes, in the Odyssey, there's really not that much detail about it. It's not a fully fleshed out novel.
no.
So she's creating this world, but it's so believable. And when you're talking about divine beings and creatures and stuff like that, you would think that that would end up being very fantastic. And if you don't like fantasy, it would turn you off. And it's not like that. She makes the interactions between mortals and gods seem almost ordinary.
Like they're at Starbucks.
Yeah, well, yeah.
Not quite.
And her story is, of course, very interesting because she is divine. Her Helios, the god of the sun, is her father. And she has, the other thing I really liked about it is she ties together a lot of mythology that you have a vague awareness of, but you never really imagined it as a single story. So her sister marries King Minos of Crete, and they are the ones who, the Minotaur is her.
Oh, right.
So basically, that's her nephew.
Her nephew. Right.
And so she's involved in that, and her brother goes off to Kolkis, which is in the Black Sea, way up north of Turkey, and his daughter is Medea, who has a whole story of her own. She's a sorceress herself, and Jason marries her and finds the Golden Fleece and comes. So all of these stories that you know little snippets of, but you never really thought of them as going together, come together into what almost becomes like a family saga.
I was going to say, I'm picturing a family tree as
Yeah,
you're talking
like,
about this. I'm like,
like
okay.
her sister-in-law and her brother-in-law, and like and
Yes.
her lousy relationship with her father, and all this. So I mean, if there was ever a dysfunctional family, it was the Greek gods.
Oh my
yeah.
goodness. Yeah.
But so Odysseus, being mortal, lands on the island, but it's not really about. The thing I also liked is it wasn't really just about him, because he's only one part of her life. There's a whole lot of mythology about her life before that and her experiences afterwards.
Okay.
And that's all woven in too. So actually, I wanted to read to you just. I'll need my glasses. Just one quick paragraph, just to give you an idea of what it sounds like, what her writing style is like. the other thing is her uncle is Prometheus, who, was punished for bringing fire to humans, so he's stuck on a mountain up in the Caucasus. And so she disobeys her father's orders and goes and brings Prometheus something to drink before he's punished. And so she's talking to him. I looked down at the empty cup, willing my courage. You aided mortals, I said. That is why you are punished. It is. Will you tell me, what is a mortal like? And don't forget, at this point in her life, she's a child. She's never seen one before. It was a child's question, but he nodded gravely. There is no single answer. They're each different. The only thing they share is death. You know the word? I know it, but I do not understand. No god can. Their bodies crumble and pass into earth. Their souls turn to cold smoke and fly to the underworld. There they eat nothing and drink nothing and feel no warmth. Everything they reach for slips from their grasp. A chill shivered across my skin. How do they bear it? As best they can. So
nice.
that's just, that's the kind of writing that she does. It's very spare, but it's just beautiful. So
It's very poetic.
it's very poetic.
But again, not
not in a-
It's not work.
impenetrable.
I think a
or-
lot of
yeah.
people would find if you were reading original myths, like if you actually try to work your way through the Odyssey, that's work.
That's a lot of work.
Yeah.
But I would definitely recommend this for people who've liked Mary Renault, who's she's long gone at this point, but in her day she was writing similar kinds of stuff. Margaret Atwood has one that came out a few years ago called The Penelopiad, which is the story, the same story, but written from Odysseus's wife's viewpoint, because she was stuck alone while her husband was away,
Right.
waiting for him to come home all this time. There's also 2 new translations of the Odyssey by Homer, which I haven't read. There's one by a woman and one by a man that have gotten really good reviews. It's always interesting if you've read one to see what a new translation does. The other one that I was thinking of, which was very enjoyable more as a memoir, was Daniel Mendelsohn, who wrote a nonfiction book about this. He's a classics professor, and he took his father on an Odyssey. It's called an Odyssey, a father, son, and an epic. He teaches the Odyssey as a college professor, and he and his father, who is elderly now, go to Greece on a trip to follow the original path of Odysseus on a vacation. And it's kind of it's historic, but it's also a bonding experience between father and son.
Yep.
So that's a really interesting perspective on the story. So I think any of those, if you like this kind of old mythology, would be really appealing for people.
I haven't read it, but I know you did. Neil Gaiman's American Gods.
Yeah.
Is that in the same
Yeah.
vein?
I was gonna say,
the writing
I mean,
style. I think is probably a
The
little
writing
different.
style's
writing
different,
style's
but
very different, but
there's a similar appeal.
There's some appeal factors that would cross over for
Yeah.
anybody who likes that kind of fantasy, and I think Gaiman's the best example of that kind of fantasy, which there's something modern about them both, even though they're about gods.
Yeah.
There's something modern feeling about them.
Yeah, and turning
Gods with problems.
well, it's interesting.
Turning
yeah.
gods into
Turning gods into mortals so that you
Mortals.
get a sense of what their lives are like, and the reverse, because
Yep.
so many of the mortals become heroic figures
Right.
because
Yeah.
they're dealing with.
And that's exactly what
Powerful
happens in
stories.
American Gods.
Yeah,
is
exactly.
they kind of switch positions.
Yeah. So again, that's Circe by Madeline Miller, and if you like it, by all means go back and read Song of Achilles.
Song of Achilles, which I can highly recommend
is
as
just an amazing, amazing
It's-
book.
Yeah. Yeah.
So Karen, did you want to? Do you have another one?
I'll just mention this other one which is nonfiction. It's by Barbara Ehrenreich, who you may know from back a ways, a book called Nickel and
Nickel and
Dime,
Dime, yeah.
Yep.
where she was looking into homelessness and poverty. And she's, I think, that's still one of her main causes. And this is called Natural Causes, and it's about possibly why the whole wellness fad, she would probably call it, that we've been going through recently might not be worth bothering with. There's a lot. It's a kind of, and indictment of a lot of things in our society, that the idea that we are trying to escape death, that our society has of not facing up to death, and how little science really knows, and how much it gets wrong, and how much it's learning still, obviously, about what's going to kill us, because we're going to die.
Well, that reminds me of the book that our nonfiction book group, True Writ, just did. What was it called?
Oh, the Swedish death cleaning book?
No. That's another book about
That's
death.
another book about
Different
death.
perspective on
what
death.
was it just called?
The happiness
Oh, happiness is a choice you
is
make.
a choice you make.
And it was about, it was a journalist who followed 6 older people, I mean, and like the old of the old, like they were all
In
like
their mid-90s.
early to mid-90s, yeah,
Right.
for a year, and sort of got their perspectives on things and how they really felt. And one of the points that they kind of make in this book over and over is that we've gotten so good at prolonging life, but we haven't gotten good enough at it to make it that life good. So it's like we're keeping people alive, but we're probably not supposed to, because you get to this point where most of them are the people in the book are not necessarily unhappy. They're actually surprisingly happy, given this litany of health problems that they all. I mean, tons of health problems. Even the healthiest ones have issues, but they're all kind of sitting there going, "Yeah, I'm done. I've been done. All my friends are dead." Your family starts to kind of leave you behind a little, because in many cases they're not living with you. I mean, more than half the people lived alone, and spent most of their time alone. And we're still. I know your dad is in this group, and he does it incredibly well.
He's fine.
He would be a great subject for it.
He's 97, but his joke is, "I'm old enough to die, but I'm still here." And
Right. That's kind of how they all feel.
I think she would say, I mean, she's younger than that, but she has made choices in her life given what she knows. She used to be a cell biologist, like a researcher, so she has a scientific background that she can, and she tells you some pretty surprising things about the cells in your body that are supposed to be part of your immune system, which we've all been taught is, supposed to protect us. Well, turns out maybe it doesn't really protect us all the time. Maybe there are actually some cells in there called macrophages, which might actually they help to spread cancer, for instance. They can be good guys, but they can also be bad guys, and nobody's quite figured out why yet. And so, all of these things that we do in life to try to keep us, whether it's eating certain things or not eating certain things, or meditating, or having every test in the book that the doctor throws at you, whatever it is, maybe it's all for nothing.
Well, don't you feel like you get to a point where you just have to laugh? There was something just recently in the news that was like, "Surprise, pasta is good for you." And I was just like, "Oh my God."
Or, "Surprise, drinking moderately is bad for you." Only I just heard that drinking moderately is not bad for you.
It's not bad for you.
At some point, they're going to determine that lettuce is fattening, and just
it's just throw up a towel. I mean,
anyway. So that's it's worth a read just to get yourself thinking about this stuff.
You could just figure out how to become immortal, like seriously,
There you go.
and then just have a whole other set of problems.
And there we go.
Right, even the gods aren't happy. So what are we worried about?
I realized I did read fiction, and I think I mentioned it last time just in passing. Right before I went on maternity leave, I read Lillian Boxfish Takes a Walk.
Oh yes.
By Catherine Rooney, I believe. Somebody will Google that later.
We can look it up. We're librarians. We'll look it up.
We'll figure it out. I'm pretty sure that's her name. I actually listened to it, and Beth from the reference department started to listen to it, and she ended up switching to read it. She something about the cadence or the reader she wasn't in love with. I didn't mind her, but it's about Lillian Boxfish, and she is 84, but she lies and says she's 82, I think. And she's lived in New York City since the 20s. It takes place actually in
Wait, because 82 is so much more younger than 84?
I think she started lying about her age before, and then it just sort of kept going. But it takes place, I think, in mid-80s. I want to say 85 or 86. And she was born at the turn of the century, and she's lived in New York City. She was an ad kind of a copywriter, or like an ad executive, and
Like somebody from one of the women from Mad Men?
yes, right. And so the whole book is, it alternates between her taking this walk on New Year's Eve 1986 or something and flashing back on her life. And at the end of it, it's I don't know, it's not like anything really happens, although this night seems extremely long, and considering she's 84, it sounds like she walks for hours, and you're like, wow. she's
obviously got some
she's a city woman.
knowledge.
But it's a really nice read, and I think it came up last time because we talked about the city as a character. The New York is very much
Bittersweet that you read.
Yes,
yeah.
and New York is very much a character in this book, and there's not a lot of other it's her, and then there's this kind of peripheral group of other people, and it's kind of a...
Is it stream of consciousness, or is it just...
No.
So it's flashbacks, it goes
It's
back.
flashbacks and her actually, and her living this last night.
Right.
This well, not last night, I mean, there's nothing to say. It sort of just ends. It's not like she dies at the end or anything. It just sort of stops. The clock strikes midnight, and there we are.
This is reminding me of, what was that book? It was about, like, the Queen gets on the train.
Yes, Mrs. Queen rides the train.
Mrs. Queen
or
rides the
takes the train
train,
or something like that.
It reminds me.
Yeah, and is it kind of, does it have that feel to it?
Kind of. It's not as it's a little.
That was more
because
whimsical, I think.
Yes, it's not whimsical because it's New York City in the '80s, so it's not when it's a nice place.
Right.
And her family's
so it's
like,
not really...
why are you still living there? You're living by yourself at this age, and it's like you're gonna get mugged, and she's, walking around in her fur on New Year's Eve, and you're kind of flashing back to like 80s movies going, oh.
But she's an admirable character? Or
Yes, she's very strong woman. She, is a divorcee, got divorced in like the 60s, so not common, and then never really remarried. But her flashbacks are very interesting because they change your picture of her
Right,
as the book goes on.
Right.
So I recommend that. I liked
Good.
it as a listen.
Good.
So.
Before we run out of time, I'll just quickly mention another of the books that I teased about last time, which is, this is another one of those authors that I love who doesn't write very often. Like maybe every 5 years or so he comes out with a book, and you can't wait. And so I tore through this in about 3 days. Alan Hollinghurst, he's won a number of awards, but he's best known for winning the Booker Prize. I forget when, at least 10 years ago, for the Line of Beauty, which was it's probably his most amazing book. And it was turned into a TV miniseries from the BBC, and it was really well done. But his new one is called The Sparsholt Affair, and it's really, all of his books are very different, but also similar. He's got a wonderful flair for language, and particularly dialogue, and time period. This is one where the Sparsholt, in this case, is a particular person who, the Sparsholt Affair is I won't give anything away, but it's a public scandal that revolves, so that the whole book revolves around this family and this incident. But the thing that's interesting is it goes way back to long before the incident actually happened. It starts when all the characters are actually in Oxford in the 1940s, and comes all the way up almost to the present day. So it's a long family saga told from different perspectives, but everything revolves around this nugget of interesting family stuff, and the dialogue is just incredible. If it's Downton Abbey-ish in some ways, if you like that. It's all British class system and that kind of stuff, but if you like that kind of rich British stuff, I highly recommend it. But we are out of time, so thank you for joining us today, and I hope we'll see you next month when we do this again. So thank you.